여러분들 기후 변화와
Good afternoon.
한반도
The topic is the diagnosis and the prescription for the resumption of the diplomacy with the North Korea conservation with the ambassador to North Korea. And we are talking about the water resources. My name is Nam Gung-un, professor of the Seoul National University. We have three distinguished presenters. We have also three discussants. First comes first. We have His Excellency Thomas Schäfer, who used to work for the Pyongyang Embassy. Next, we have Mr. Kim Kyung-hoon of the Korea Water Resources Corporation. Last but not least, we have Professor Lee Chang-hee from Myeongji University. So we have three presenters who are gathered here today. And after the presentation, there will be a panel discussion. Mr. Kim Tae-gyun, who is the Secretary General of the KCRC, is here today. Next up, we have Mr. Helix Glenk, who is the project manager for the Hans Chaitel Foundation. And also, we have Professor Kim Young-oh from Seoul National University for the panel discussion. We are going to talk about water-related issues. There are presentations about the water. Probably that's why it is raining a lot, and I sincerely hope that the water session will be really successful thanks to the heavy rain. On the Korean Peninsula, as you know, there are lots of challenges and difficulties. The sanction against North Korea and the tension between the two Koreas. And we have prolonged challenges. So, in addition to it, water-related disaster and climate change requires urgent cooperation between the two sides. North Korea, in its 8th Work Party Convention, prioritized the flood prevention. Along with the US and the UN, it has come up with the cooperation measures against the climate change. That is the current measures taken by the North Korea. The South Korean government is now coming up with a plan for the disaster prevention and the cooperation to save the life and the property of the citizens of the both sides. Water management and the river management plans have been disclosed by the South Korean government. That is why we have this session to diagnose the issues about the water issues and find a way forward for the water-related cooperation between the two sides. First comes first, I would like to invite His Excellency Thomas Schäfer, who's been working as an ambassador 2 times in Pyongyang. And about his career, please refer to his biography in the proceedings. And without further ado, I would like to invite Ambassador Thomas Schäfer, and he's been working 2 terms from the 2007 to 2010 and the 2013 to 2018. He's been the ambassador of the Germany to Pyongyang, and he has done lots of activities. Please welcome him with big hands.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the K-Water and the Ministry of Unification for inviting me to participate in this important event. It is a great honor for me, and I appreciate the willingness to support North Korea and cooperation with North Korea. The title of my contribution is, and I quote, Diplomacy and Water, about the difficulties to help North Korea. You will see that I'm going to talk a lot about diplomacy and even more about difficulties, but only a little about water. The reason is that I do not understand much about water. I'm glad that there are experts here that are well qualified to talk about it. Let me tell you about my experiences in North Korea. Germany established diplomatic relations with Pyongyang in 2001 at the request of the South Korean government, which hoped that Germany and the European Union would play a more active role in supporting the Sunshine Policy. Since then, Germany, together with the other EU states, has sought to moderate North Korea through a policy of critical engagement to convince it of the benefits of international cooperation and respect for the rule of law, and to help improve the political and economic situation of the people at least a little. In international relations, criticism is easier to accept when it comes from a country one trusts. Over the years, Germany has tried to build trust with North Korea, not only through open political dialogue, but also in a variety of other ways, such as humanitarian aid projects in agriculture, forestry, the environment, advice on economic reforms, special economic zones, investment, tourism, educational and cultural activities such as the sending of German language teachers, medical training, scholarships, film events, collaborations in the field of music, support in the restoration of old temples, the establishment of a library, and the construction of 2 pavilions in traditional Korean style on the grounds of the embassy. The projects were carried out by 8 organizations such as German Agro Action and the Red Cross, the Goethe Institute, the German Academic Exchange Service, several so-called political foundations such as the Untitled Foundation, which is present here, the embassy, and others. The balance sheet is mixed. In political terms, I believe that these exercises in confidence building reinforced North Korea's view of Germany as a critical but reliable partner that stands by its word. From a technical point of view, however, the outcome is less positive. The impact of many international projects in North Korea, be they organized by Germany or other international partners, remains limited. We also experienced some failures, and many good ideas could not be implemented. This was not because the implementing organizations commissioned by the German side had not worked properly. Rather, the political conditions in North Korea are so bad that international project cooperation hardly ever produces truly satisfactory results. A number of basic conditions for successful international cooperation are not being met by North Korea. Humanitarian aid projects, for example, are generally intended to benefit the most deprived sectors of the population, prevent discrimination, and ensure that aid is provided and received in a transparent manner. Aid agencies should always have access to the groups and areas they support, inter alia, to better understand the needs and to ensure effective control of resources. For a number of reasons, all these conditions are not available in North Korea. To start with, North Korea has different goals and priorities than the donor community. The regime is primarily concerned with securing the system. Control of the population, military considerations, and ideological zeal usually take priority over economic or development objectives. This explains the adherence to a notoriously inefficient economic system, the resistance to any real reforms, the construction of economically nonsensical prestige projects, and the preferential treatment given to Pyongyang to the detriment of the rural communities. Let me elaborate on this last point. Most of the wider elite and regime supporting staff live in the capital city. To provide for them is in the regime's political interest. In contrast, according to the Songbun caste system, the members of the rural communities since Kim Il-sung's time have been considered politically unreliable and therefore, even if in dire need, not worthy of equal treatment. Instead of clamoring for systemic changes, they are expected to accept their life of deprivation as a just retribution for their forefathers' lack of support of the revolution. The difference between the international communities and the regime's priorities, helping the people most in need versus generating political support within the wider elite, is striking. Transparency and project control have always been an issue. Lack of access is a huge impediment. North Korean information and numbers are notoriously unreliable, and the problems have worsened in the last years. For example, since 2014 or so, the international aid organizations have not been allowed to estimate the expected harvest quantities based on their own independent crop assessments. As a result, nobody outside North Korea has any reliable knowledge about how insufficient the food supply of the North Korean population really is. I assume that the situation is quite bad right now, but does it come close to the famine in the 90s? We simply do not know. If conditions are really bad indeed, is it not high time for the North Korean government to invite institutions like the World Food Programme, the FAO, and others back into the country to undertake their own independent assessment? Based on their judgment, international help could soon be on its way. But the regime feels threatened by offers to help or cooperate. The leadership views cooperation with foreigners and even mere contacts as a threat to the stability of the regime against which safeguards must be taken. Take communication control as an example. Almost anywhere in the world, speaking the language of the host country is regarded as an asset. But in North Korea, foreigners who speak Korean are not automatically welcomed, but received with particular suspicion. Some NGOs have even been prohibited from hiring foreign Korean speakers. For some hardliners within the leadership, even safeguards are not enough. Instead, they outright reject almost any form of meaningful cooperation, be it humanitarian aid, economic development cooperation, contract manufacturing in special economic zones, or traditional joint ventures. I would like to emphasize this point. North Korea is not the monolithic country it pretends to be. The regime and the population do not stand united, and there are fundamental differences of opinion as well as power struggles within the leadership. I worked in Pyongyang, as was said already, from 2007 to 10, and again from 2013 to 18. I witnessed different opinions in the leadership throughout my stay. In September 2007, a few weeks after I had arrived, the North Korean media reported that the government had thanked foreign states, including Germany, for their help in supporting flood victims the month before. A matter of course, one would think. In North Korea, however, the expression of gratitude promptly led to rebuttals. On the same day, a biting comment appeared in Rodong Shinmun, warning against outside help and cooperation. The imperialists, it was said, were peddling support only to achieve their true goals and bring death and destruction. A week later, the newspaper warned against the imperialistic policy of ideological and cultural poisoning. It was obvious that some part of the leadership wanted foreign aid and others rejected it. The same applied to foreign investment. During the second Inter-Korean Summit in October 2007, the two leaders raised the prospects of comprehensive South Korean aid and investment. In the following weeks, a semi-public discussion in the North Korean leadership about the meaning of juche ensued that seemed to question parts of the inter-Korean understanding. A preliminary result of these discussions was presented in the joint commentary of the main newspapers on the new year 2008. An increase in economic exchanges with foreign countries and making profit were considered the right thing to do. However, the procurement of foreign technology and capital was no longer mentioned. Instead, economic development was to be based on our, as it was said, based on our own strength, technology, and resources. It was a remarkable outcome. Kim Jong-il, in relations with South Korea and on issues of economic openness, had pursued a policy that did not meet the wishes of parts of the leadership, and dissatisfied hardliners in the leadership had forced him into a retreat. During my years in Pyongyang, I often talked with North Korean officials about development aid and foreign investment. I got the impression that most of them would have welcomed some opening and economic reform. But there were also people that rejected such ideas, as sometimes was openly admitted. Once, during a bilateral discussion with a very high-ranking official, I mentioned that a seminar organized and financed with German support was cut short after the first day because the Korean participants had suddenly been sent to the countryside to, as it was said, help the farmers. When my counterpart started to laugh, I told him, "Do you want to know what I really think? I believe some people here want changes and others don't." He nodded in agreement and said, "Yes, and we need to change that." I heard similar admissions by high-ranking officials several times during my stay in Pyongyang. North Korea became more reluctant to go forward with projects involving foreign or South Korean participation after Kim Jong-il's stroke in 2008, as his political power was waning and the voices of the country's hardliners became more powerful. During the era of Kim Jong-un, the hardliners have increased their sway even more. This development profoundly affected the relationship with South Korea and China. The inter-Korean Kumgangsan project was closed in 2008, and the Kaesong industrial complex encountered serious difficulties in 2009 and again in 2013. Ironically, soon after the adoption of North Korea's Byongjin policy, which, in spite of proclaiming simultaneous economic and military development, allocated significant additional resources from the civilian sector to the military, and which, by the way, was contested as well. After the inter-Korean border had been closed for a few days in 2009, temporarily paralyzing the industrial zone in Kaesong, I asked several officials who had decided this. At that time, I only encountered evasiveness. It was only after coming back to North Korea in 2013 that I received a clear answer. After the zone had been closed again, I was told by a high-ranking official that the decision had been taken by the military against the will of the party and the government. It was the first time I had heard a clear admission from a senior official that the military had been responsible for the difficulties surrounding the Kaesong industrial zone and that it had not been the result of a unified regime's policy. The closure of Kaesong is only one of several examples of how the power struggle between moderates and hardliners within the North Korean leadership has affected the relationship with South Korea in the last years of Kim Jong-il's and the first years of Kim Jong-un's reign. I'm convinced that these events cannot be plausibly explained by a unified North Korean strategy or a good cop, bad cop policy. Rather, they were the result of infighting and the lack of a consistent, strong leadership. As to China, work on joint projects decreased considerably following the downfall of Jang Song-taek, Kim Jong-il's brother-in-law, with some inclination for opening up and economic reform and close ties to Beijing. The planned special economic zone near Sinuiju never took off, and the new Yalu River Bridge, while completed, was sealed off on the Korean side. Construction work on a new road between Sinuiju and Anju had been abandoned even before. When I later inquired if the construction would be taken up again, some of my interlocutors seemed to think that a new road would be more important to China than to North Korea herself. The North Korean hardliners have been in the ascent since Kim Jong-il's stroke in 2008 and firmly established themselves in the leadership in 2015 or 16 at the latest. They see in aid and economic cooperation less of an opportunity than a risk to the regime's stability. As the closure of Kaesong has shown, they use cooperation as a bargaining chip and are willing to accept financial losses for political gains. While they might well want to see an end to sanctions and would not mind cash transfers or business deals managed at a distance, they fear foreigners as potential conduits of destabilizing ideas and therefore do not want to engage in jointly run projects with other countries. In the winter of 2014 and 15, they used the Ebola pandemic as a pretext to shut off their country from the outside world and from contacts with foreigners living in North Korea. I suspect that right now, the undeniable danger of a COVID-19 outbreak is being abused in the same way. I'm convinced that the hardliners even see the decades-old railway project linking China and South Korea as threatening, despite the evident economic advantages for all parties involved. From their point of view, even the sight of modern passenger or freight trains on transit routes through North Korea would make the DPRK's technological and material backwardness starkly apparent. Ordinary North Koreans watching the trains go by would realize how false everything they had been told about the greatness of their country and its leadership really is. The railway link is only one of many economic incentives that have been offered to Pyongyang over the years in return for denuclearization, opening up, economic reforms, and improvements in human rights. During Kim Jong-il's rule, North Korea would accept economic incentives in return for denuclearization pledges. North Korea got extensive oil and food supplies as a result of the Geneva Agreed Framework and the six-party talks, for example. The collapsed 2012 Leap Day Agreement devised under Kim Jong-il's rule also included economic provisions. During Kim Jong-un's time, however, North Korea has placed more emphasis on progress towards its goal in the realm of security policy. Since that year, it has been regularly calling for an end to joint military drills, the withdrawal of American troops from the peninsula, replacing the 1953 ceasefire agreement with a peace treaty, and ending South Korean protection from the US nuclear umbrella. To be clear, Pyongyang did not entirely cease its economic demands. It has continued to demand sanctions relief, but its calls for economic concessions have been weaker than security demands. It's a shift of emphasis rather than an either-or negotiating stance. When I asked representatives of various North Korean institutions what a peace treaty should include, the answer always included the withdrawal of US troops from the Korean Peninsula and sometimes getting rid of the US nuclear umbrella. Sanctions relief was only mentioned incidentally. When inquiring what Pyongyang's demands for the US to abandon its hostile policy exactly meant, the answers were similar. The end of maneuvers and the withdrawal of troops ranked first, the lifting of sanctions was subordinate. On several other occasions, I have also bluntly been told that there could be no progress on the issue of nuclear weapons without an end to joint maneuvers and the withdrawal of US troops. North Korea has also demonstrated how little it cares about the resumption of joint economic projects. In October 2019, Kim Jong-un himself ordered the demolition of South Korean-built buildings at the Mount Kumgang resort. In June 2020, Kim Jong-un's sister, threatened to blow up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office in Kaesong, and shortly afterwards, North Korea did just that. By the way, the fact that it was the son and the daughter of Kim Jong-il that threatened the destruction of the buildings was not only directed at South Korea. I believe that it was also a swipe by the hardliners at the legacy of Kim Jong-il's inter-Korean initiatives that in North Korea have always been regarded as his personal pet projects. In July 2020, Kim Yo-jong made the limited importance North Korea attaches to sanctions relief very clear. Her statement said that the denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula can be realized only when there are major changes made on the other side. I have to point out clearly, she said, that it does not mean the lifting of sanctions when we refer to major changes from the other side. I have no doubt, I myself have no doubt, that instead she referred to American troop withdrawal. To summarize, the shift of emphasis in the negotiating position reflects the rise of the hardliners. For them, money takes second place. Their primordial goal is to weaken the US-South Korean relationship, get American troops off the peninsula, and ultimately achieve Korean reunification on their terms, of course. I believe that as long as hardliners dominate the North Korean leadership, trying to entice the regime to reform and denuclearize with economic incentives will ultimately prove fruitless. Only once North Korea's moderates regain some control will Pyongyang again realize the benefits of opening up economic reform and hopefully move toward denuclearization and an improvement of its dismal human rights record. I know, of course, that this is a sobering analysis. What are the prospects for better circumstances? And what can we do now? Time is not on Pyongyang's side. Economically, North Korea is at an impasse. the gap to China and South Korea will continue to grow. More outside information will seep into the country. Dissatisfaction will increase. The voices within the leadership that want to follow the Chinese or Vietnamese path will grow louder again. At some point, opinions within the North Korean leadership will shift and the country will perform a change in direction. Until then, the international community should take a long-term view. It should maintain political and economic pressure on North Korea, supplemented by a willingness to improve communication channels, talk and negotiate. For a long time, South Korea has wanted to establish a liaison office in the North. I firmly believe that the US and Japan should follow suit and offer the establishment of offices in Pyongyang as well as Washington and Tokyo. If there's a need for humanitarian aid confirmed by relevant international institutions, it should be provided. Small confidence-building measures that do not only create trust, but provide broader substance to a dialogue should be offered, even if it is far from certain that they would be welcomed. Building trust in North Korea is more difficult for South Korea than for Germany. South Korea is regarded as an acute threat. Its cultural influence is felt all over the country. Maintaining control of larger numbers of Korean speakers, be they business persons or tourists, and interdicting contacts with the North Korean population is considered a huge challenge by Pyongyang. Whenever South Koreans are involved, security forces will be more vigilant and act more harshly. Germany has more leeway than South Korea to present its way of life to North Koreans and probably also a bit more freedom to interact with North Koreans. Under these circumstances, a promising way for Seoul to gain trust and showcase the advantages of its system might be to offer technical assistance in satisfying the basic needs of the most disadvantaged population. Small projects of technical assistance in key areas such as agriculture, water, sanitation, and hygiene would provide immediate help, redress social injustice, and contribute to correct the slander directed at South Korea by the North's propaganda. It is a well-known fact that water, and potable water in particular, is scarce in many parts of North Korea. Traveling overland in winter, we sometimes saw people cutting blocks of ice from frozen rivers and lakes and carrying those heavy blocks to their houses. They seemed to be their only supply of water. K-Water, whether directly or through an NGO, be it South Korean or foreign, could offer to assist in improving the water supply in a number of rural villages. I do not know whether such an offer would be accepted, but in any case, trying to help the most disadvantaged members of the North Korean society would be a noble act for South Korea. Thank you very much.
네.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for the precious insight.
북한의 이 복잡한
North Korea is in complex political and economic situation that can hamper the exchanges between the two Koreas, and we need to have the better and the effective mutual exchanges between the two Koreas. Agriculture, hygiene, and water can be one of the key sectors to meet the basic needs of the human being, and that kind of urgent support can be the first step we can take. And you underlined that there are vulnerable citizens in North Korea, and we need to pay more attention to them. Thank you very much for the insights. And next, I would like to invite the second speaker.
이 세션입니다. 발표입니다.
The second speaker is
여러분들은 한국 수자원공사가
from the
주관하는
K-Water.
세션
And now
4에
you are joining the session 3.4 organized by the Korea Water Resources Corporation. We are talking about the climate change, Korean Peninsula, water disaster, and the potential cooperation. Next up, we have General Manager Kim Kyung-hoon from K-Water. He's going to tell us about the inter-Korean cooperation to prevent the water disaster coming from the Imjin River. He's been working for the K-Water, and he's been the coordinating head and the future strategy head. He has been deeply engaged in the inter-Korean cooperation for the water resources management and disaster prevention. Mr. Kim, please.
예, 안녕하세요. 저는 오늘 여러분께
Hello, my name is Kim Kyung-hoon, who is going to tell us about the inter-Korean cooperation to prevent the water disaster coming from the Imjin River. I sincerely hope that we can be reconnected to the Imjin River. And now I'm going to start my presentation. This is the agenda, the overall information about the Imjin River and the water disaster and the possible cooperation. Imjin River is the shared river. Shared river means that between the two countries there is a border, however the river runs across the border. In Korea, we have Yalu, Tumen, Bukhan, and Imjin River. They are the shared river. Imjin River is the shared river. And if we have the DMZ as a demarcation line, it runs from the north to the south. And it is originated from the north side, from the Turyu mountain. And it is going to the Hantan, and it is going from north to the south. And as you can see, the total length is 254 kilometers. Imjin River is a shared river. The North Korean side is accounting for the 63% of the total Beijing side. On the south side, and when we have the Kumnam Flooding Control Center, we are accounting for 37% of the Beijing. And we have the Kumnam Dam, but we cannot have the full facilities, so we have lots of issues with that. And let me tell you a little bit more about the status about the dams located in North Korea for the power generation and for the agriculture and irrigation. They have the basin change systems and they have the staired types of the dams. And as you can see, the Icheon and other dams are located to the east side. And Icheon and the Hwangang is changing the waterway to the Yesang River. And the Sepo and the Pyeonggang, and there are 4 newly developed hydropower generation plants. If those hydropower plants are generated, then the water available to the southern side, I mean to the South Korea, will become less and less. Let me tell you about the irrigation status in North Korea. They have Hwanghae-do, which is the breadbasket for North Korea, and they are building more irrigation and irrigation. And they are changing the waterway from the Daedong River and nearby the Imjin and the Yesang, and their waterway is now rerouted to the Yeonbaek Plain, where there are lots of the crops. And in the Sinwon, Byeokseong, Ongjin, 120 kilometers of the irrigation way was created. The phase 2 was finalized. Bongcheon and the Cheongdan are connected. Another irrigation way was made, which is as long as 80 kilometers. And there are issues between the Imjin River. On the southern side, we have issues like this. On the Yesang River side, on the eastern side, North Korea is rerouting the water. So on the southern side, we are lack of the water.
그리고 이제 또한 이제 수질이라든지 수생태
The water
환경에도
quality is poor and it has impact on the ecosystem as well. During the flood season, sometimes North Korea is discharging the water without prior notice. So we have lots of damages. As you can see, because of the unauthorized discharges, we have a lot of damages to the South Korea. And it is high time for us to jointly use the shared water based on the previous agreement. However, North Korea is not responding. So the South Korean side made some responses. And nearby the DMZ, we have the two flood control dams. And on the downstream, we have a higher and the stronger dike banks. So in the second phase, we have more and more water available. Now we can provide some water for the agriculture. And we usually open the doors open for the dam. And for the Hantan River Dam, and we have built a new dam so that we can control flood better. Then what is the response from the North? And North Korea is arguing to get over the lack of the power resources and the food. They need more water. And they are arguing that they are still lack of water. From the North Korean perspective, they probably need more water control and management facilities. And they are indifferent to the cooperation about the shared river. So there is a clear difference between the two. So we need to cover the Imjin River and Hwanghae province area so that we can have a comprehensive water-related cooperation between the two. As you can see here, there has been lots of damages in the 1996, 98, and in 1999. Yeoncheon, Paju, Dongducheon, and Pocheon, there has been a huge flood in South Korea. And because of that, 120 people were died or missing, and there have been more than 31,000 people who are displaced. And because of the huge flood in South Korea, we built the Hantan River Dam and we built more dikes and the banks. And after the 2000, North Korea continued illegal or the unauthorized discharge, and that has caused lots of damage to us. As you can see, in the 2009 and 2016, there has been unauthorized discharges without any prior notice to the southern side. So, on the Gunnam Dam, the maximum level of the water was reached. So all the citizens were evacuated from the downstream area. In the August of the 2020, it rained heavily on the northern side and also it rained heavily on the southern side. There has been lots of the flood damage coming out of that. According to the Rodong Shinbun, they are doing their effort to get over the damage coming from the flood, and we needed to provide a stable life back to the citizens. That was the report from the Rodong Shinbun. So we can say last August was the worst flood event ever. And as you can see, there have been more than 16,000 houses drained, and some of the dams were collapsed. And some of the dam facilities were lost. And you can see the pictures that we got from Google. And before the flood, and you can see the Pyeonggang facility, it was being built. However, after the flood, you can see the stream is running, which means that the construction activity was not that successful.
남북 간 협력 방안이
Let me tell you about the potential cooperation between the two Koreas.
정부에서는 임진강 하류
So
지역
far,
대규모 홍수 피해에
To prevent the flood damage, based on the joint declaration of the June 15th, there has been the ministerial level talks, and two Koreas agreed on the prevention of the disaster. And we created the working group level. We provided the information. We got some information from North Korea as well. In 2009, we came up with the basic plan and provided the detailed action plan. However, North Korea never acted on this plan. In the October of the 2009, because of the unauthorized discharge, 6 people died, and North Korea expressed their regret. However, the working level discussion was discontinued after that. So we did not have any more discussion. This is the Korean government position about the prevention of the water damage. And we want North Korea to give prior notice before they discharge the water. And the Korean government expressed its regret about North Korea. And Ministry of Unification is arguing that the Imjin and Bukhan River should be jointly managed by the two Koreas. Joint research and other project has been suggested by the Ministry of the Unification, as long as the tension goes away between the two sides. This is the basic strategy of the K-water. And we want to resume the water damage prevention works related to the Imjin River, and based on that outcome, we needed to replicate the success. We needed to resume what was agreed before. For example, prior notice and the working level discussion should be resumed. We needed to provide more information, and we needed to provide better support to North Korea so that they can have better facilities. And the North Korea should provide the water resources, and the South side should provide technical assistance in exchange for the water. And that kind of trade should be made between the two sides, and it can be mutually beneficial to North Korea and South Korea. Next one is having more water management and the monitoring facilities. 60% of the Imjin River is dominated by North Korea. So we needed to have the monitoring facility on the northern side, not to the southern side. So we needed to, we have agreed already to share the information about the water volume and the water level. And we needed to utilize those information. If we can do that, we can possibly prevent more damages coming out of the flood. K-water has the disaster prevention system, and we want to have the better communication system between the two Koreas, and we can build 30 monitoring systems on North Korea. On the Beijing level, we needed to have the field research. On the Imjin River and the Yeseong River, they were lack of the water, and they have lots of the flood. North Korea is in need of the water for their food and the power generation. When we have the drought, North Korea has the drought as well. Nearby Imjin and Yeseong water, we needed to study how the water is being utilized. We needed to have the standing body for the discussion and negotiation between the two. We need the ground rules for the water quality, water level, and ecosystem management. In the past, we have the working group level committee, and it can be changed to the Joint Water Management Council, and we can focus on the water usage, water control, and ecosystem. We need to expand our area of the interest, not just by the central government, but we need private participation, public participation, and even the participation from the regional government. We need to build trust between the two Koreas. Then we can have a comprehensive cooperation for the water infrastructure. If we build trust between the two, and we need to maintain the dams better, especially those vulnerable to the leakage and earthquake. The dams were built 50 to 100 years ago. They are outdated. So they are really old and outdated in North Korea. So the dams are vulnerable to the drought and the flood. So we need to have the better maintenance and the better recovery of the dam system in North Korea. Also, the utilization rate is not that high, so we needed to recover the dam facilities in North Korea. And the dams should be changed to the multi-purpose dam, not just for the dam itself. So far, I've been telling you based on assumption when the tensions are going down between the two Koreas. But under the current situation, what can be the viable options? First, the Biden administration wants to keep the denuclearization, and they are going to keep the same stance, and it's going to take a long time to get the help from the US. So we need to have the better monitoring and update the dam operation. For the monitoring, we can use the satellite image so that we can better monitor the water level, and thereby the 38 parallel, we can establish more facilities for the monitoring. And you can see the waterway is stopped. In the future, we want the waterway to be connected, and K-Water will be the bridging point between the waterway between the two Koreas. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kim. He made a wonderful presentation. The two Korea is sharing the Imjin River. The two Korea needed to prevent the damage coming out of that and utilize the shared river. The so-called win-win strategy was proposed. Thank you. We needed to resume the working group level discussion again in the long term, and we needed to have the better water and the energy exchanges between the two sides. Thank you very much for the proposal.
Moving on, we would like to have the third presentation. From Myeongji University, we invited Professor Lee Chang-hee, who will be the third presenter. Presenter Lee Chang-hee is one of the experts in Korea in water management. He served as a chairperson of the Water Environmental Society, and now he is a chairperson of the Presidential Committee in National Water Resource Management. He will talk about the water quality issue in DPRK and inter-Korean cooperation direction. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity for presenting my paper. The title was already introduced, and this is the order of my presentation. I would like to focus on the water quality in DPRK, what is the current status, and based on that, in the future, how we can work together between the two Koreas. That will be the essence of my presentation. In Korean Broadcasting Company, they made a report that PC is floating in Taedong River, and some people experienced the stomach upset. It was reported in 2021, April 21st. Taedong River is the most prominent river in North Korea. And late Wonsun Park, the mayor of Seoul City, had a dialogue with Chairperson Kim, and Kim Jong-un said that he wants to address the water quality problem in Taedong River. So this shows that how much serious the water quality issue is in North Korea. But unfortunately, there is no way we can tell how much damage is done to the river. So we are relying on media reports, and we can also have a survey of the North Korean defectors. Based on these, we collect the information and assess the status of water quality. Of course, we can observe the volume of water in a remote manner. However, there is no way we can tell the quality of water without going there. So as for the water quality, we have insufficient volume of information. So my presentation will focus on water quality. First of all, when we look at water quality, how it is managed, we can see legislation. In 1986, they created Environmental Protection Act. And in 1997, they created Water Resource Act. And in the same year, they also established Seawater Pollution Prevention Act. And in 2002, they also established River Act. And in 2009, they also enacted Water Supply Act. So these water-related laws have been established recently. And in order to improve the water quality of Taedong River, they established a separate law in 2008, which shows that the water quality issue is really serious. When we look into the Environmental Protection Act, there is a goal. They have a standard, and what is the management tools. And even though it is a socialist country, they use economic incentives. And they also have the emission fees, and there are also inspections. And moving on to the Taedong River Pollution Prevention Act, they specify the principles, monitoring methods, and what we need to notice here is usually in Korea we have a monthly monitoring, and we have a total air quality monitoring system, and usually the interval is 8 days. However, in North Korea, they carry out this monitoring survey 2 times a week. So the interval is very short, and they are paying keen attention to this. But I'm questioning whether they are actually observing this law. And there are many things specified here, such as the pollutant management, the management of the dilution water. So they specified all the measures they can manage the water quality, including special measures. So by looking at this, we can say that the focus and priority of water quality management in North Korea is set on Taedong River. Then what about other regions? We don't have enough data about Pyongyang, so the data of other region is even more insufficient. Even if there are a lot of pollutants, if there are sufficient treatment centers, then there is no problem. But in North Korea, we can assume that there are not enough number of treatment centers. So as for Taedong River, there is electricity, electronics industries, So due to these industries, there can be water quality issues. And other regions manufacture military goods and mining. And obviously, the rivers around this region will have poor water quality. Then in North Korea, when we look at Pyongyang or some specific regions, we can tell that they are keenly interested in the water quality issue. But what about other regions? We can tell their interest from the New Year's address. Overall, the interest in the environmental issue is decreasing. It peaked in 2014, but over time, the comments on the environmental issue is decreasing. But what about the water issue? In 2020, they had flood. So during that time, they have high interest in water issue, but in 2016, only they mentioned water issue 10%. So usually their focus is about flood and the use of water. There are three areas in water management: water use, water quality, and water volume. And water quality has the lowest priority in North Korea. When we read Rodong Sinmun, we can find articles related to Bukchon, which is a mining village, and they also focus on Taedong River. So these attentions are usually attached to specific areas, not the general environment. The water quality management is also focused on specific areas. And based on the survey of the North Korean defectors, we can tell which problems are taking place in North Korea. Good examples are water supply, water quality, and public water pollution. These have high priorities. So we can tell that North Korea is experiencing a serious water quality issue. That was the explanation for the left part. But North Korean defectors usually think that other issues are even more serious. So water issues on the right side are in the middle. And this is the international report. I can show you the quantitative data. And the COD is aggravating over time. Of course, based on the environmental standard, it is all right. And the biggest problem is E. coli. The criteria is 10,000, but the actual number is way more than the criteria. So having high number of E. coli means there are a lot of human manure in the river, and they are discharging that to the river. That's why the pipeline is infested with E. coli. That's why North Korea established a special management plan. As a matter of fact, in North Korea, when we observe the water supply line, whether it is urban area or rural area,
가정에 들어오는 물조차도
Not just the source water,
크게
even the
영향을
tap
받고 있는
water
것들을
are affected by E. coli.
그래서 이것들은 정말 물의 수원부터
So from
시작해서
the source of the water
그래서 결론적으로
to the
우리가
supply
탭워터에 이르기까지
and eventually
이
to the
대장균
tap
문제, 가장
water,
기본적인 대장균 문제조차도 지금 해결이
even
안
the
되고
basic
있다는
problem
것들을
of E. coli is
보여주는
not addressed
데이터라고 볼 수
in
있습니다.
North Korea, and this data
뭐 이런
is the
것들은 왜
evidence.
이러냐?
Then what is the
엄청나게 많은
reason?
문제고 있죠. 이
Of
분야는
course, there
뭐
are
제 분야가
many
아니기
problems,
때문에
but
뭐
I'm
정치적인
not
문제,
specialized
주체
in
사상
this
문제,
area,
정치적인
such as the
문제라든가
political issues,
뭐
including 주체 idea,
경제적으로 프라이어리티
and
문제라든가
they have
사회적으로
economic
환경에 대한
priorities,
인식 부족이라든가
and they have a low understanding
우선시하는 정책으로
in the
인해서
society.
환경에 대해서 배신경을
And due to the
안
military
쓴다든가
society,
아주
they
다양한
have a
구조적인
low
문제들이
understanding
있고요.
about the environment.
이런 거 말고
So there are
실제
many structural causes.
전문가들이 생각하는 문제는 뭐냐?
But
이게
from
이제
the
여기
expert
expert
perspective,
opinion이라고 이렇게 돼 있는데요. 가장 큰 직접적인 문제라고
the
할 수
most
있죠.
direct problem
사하수 시설,
is the water supply
얘기하는
and
기본
sewage
인프라가 지금
infrastructure.
없다는 게
These
가장 큰
infrastructure
문제가
is not
인프라
well
자체가 지금 안 돼
equipped.
있다는 거죠. 이게 이제 우리 전문가들이 진단하는
This is the
가장
diagnosis
우선순위
of the
문제고요.
experts.
그래서 향후에 협력을 한다.
So in the
그러면은
future, if we
전문가의
work together
의견,
with
이런 인프라,
DPRK, we first need to revamp the infrastructure. That should be the first
물론
priority.
한국인들이 생각하는 생각은
Of course,
좀 달라요.
North Korean
그분들은
defectors have different opinion
전반적인 자기가 경험하고 인지하는 거기 때문에
because they are raising their voice
가장
based on their
보다 근본적인
experience.
문제를 다루고 있죠.
So
에너지라든가 이런 문제가
they
부족하기
mention
때문에 지금 모든 환경
about
문제가
lack of
발생하고
energy supply,
가장
and
우선순위로 에너지
they think
부족의
that is
문제를
the reason that they do not have good
참고적으로
quality of water.
보시면 알 수 있을 것 같습니다.
So please refer to the slides for your information.
자, 그러면 이제 우리나라 정부는 지금 이
Then,
문제를 어떻게 보고
what is
최근에
the
국가
stance
물관리
of
기본 계획이 이제
South Korean government?
발전되었죠.
Recently,
이
North
과정에서
Korean
보면은
water
세 가지
management plan was
정책을
established,
제안을 하고 있습니다.
and in the plan,
첫
there are
번째가
three major
공유하천
directions.
건전의
The first one is a shared river.
김경훈
Just
발표자가 말씀하신
before,
그 문제가
Manager
있고요.
Kyung-won Kim
두
mentioned this
번째가
shared
이제
river
어떻게
issue,
하면,
and the
우리
second
협력 사업을
pillar
증진시킬 수 있는가
is
하는
promotion
그런
of joint
것들이
management
있고, 또
projects.
세 번째가 지금
The
부족한
third one
인포메이션을
is
어떻게
lack of
확보하고
information.
그래서
How
같이
can we secure
한반도
enough information?
물정보 센터를 만들자라는
So the answer is creating
세 가지
Korean
내용이
Peninsula
북한
Water
물관리
Information
기본 계획에
Center.
반영돼 있습니다.
These three are
이거는
included
사실
in the national
앞에 두
plan.
과제는 제외하면
Aside
마지막
from
거는
the
이제 우리 스스로
two
하는
plans, the third
앞에 두
one
개는,
can be done
좀
by
급하게
ourselves.
호응을 해야 어느 정도
However, for
진행이
the plan
되겠죠.
1 and 2,
큰 틀에서
we
보면
need
사실은
cooperation from the
굉장히 많은
DPRK.
제안들이 지금까지 있었습니다.
Up until now, there have been many
그래서 이
proposals.
이 단계적 접근을 보면
When we look at the phased approach,
우리끼리 잘해보자, 우리끼리 준비하자 하는 내용이 첫 번째로
there are some arguments that South Korea should prepare first, such as creating water forum,
공유하천에 대해서
and especially when it comes to the shared river,
센터를 만들어서
we can
부족한
create
정보를
an information center
빨리 모아서
to collect enough information so that we can have more practical response to the North Korean water issue.
정치적으로 저희가 되면 상당히
If
많은
political
일들을
environment is
할수 있을
allowed,
겁니다.
then we can do
그런 것들은 여기서
more.
구체적으로 얘기할 필요는 없을
I don't
것
think
같습니다.
this is not the place to discuss about that. However,
이제 남과 북이
in the future,
통일 단계에
once
이르면
we
우리가
reach
지금
the
굉장히 다른
unification
시스템을
stage,
지금 운영하고 있습니다. 물관리 시스템에.
since we have totally different water management system between North and South Korea,
제가 여기 이제
we
여기
need to
발표에
have a
예시로
process
든 거는
to integrate these two
중에
different water management systems.
만 예시를
But
든
in
겁니다.
my presentation, I'm focusing on the water
1, 2단계도 좀
quality issue.
어렵겠지만 지금 대부분
In the
물자
first
이제
and second
제한이라든가
phase,
유엔의 그
even though it will be
것들
very
때문에
difficult due
실제
to
할수
the
있는
sanctions of the
기기
UN,
제공이라든가 훈련이라든가
we can provide the
이런 사소한
training,
것들도 지금 할 수 없는 상태죠.
but the situation is not allowed.
좀 더 현실적인 국가 차원에서는
But at the national level, I believe
제시를 할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
we can provide
물론
more
지역
practical
차원에서도 지금까지
solutions.
많은 일들이 이루어졌고요.
But at the regional
하나의
level,
지금
we have more
서울과
progress.
평양 간에
Between Seoul
협력
and Pyongyang,
있었는데요.
there
상하수
have
부분의
been
협력이
cooperation
있었죠. 아까 대동강을
for
우선적으로
water supply and
수질
sewage.
개선을 원한다고 했을 때 여기 수질이라 그러면 공공수요 플러스 드링킹 워터까지
So
다 포함하는
here,
거죠.
water quality
그래서
means
상하수도
public
수질 개선
water
지원,
and
기술
tap
협력,
water,
그리고 평양 하수처리장 개량 지원,
such as
민간
improvement
협력,
of
이런
the
것들이
Pyongyang
굉장히
water
10개의
treatment center.
프로젝트 중에 가장 우선순위가
There have been 10 projects,
높았던 그런 프로젝트입니다.
and top priority was given to the water quality management.
광역자치단체
So
차원에서
in the
협력이
future,
된다고
if
그러면
we
이런
have a cooperation
모델들이
between
국내
regional
이미,
governments,
요거를 따라서 볼수
then
있을 것 같습니다.
this slide can
여기는 이제
be
핵심적인
a
사항이
good
뭐냐면 북한이 요구하는 것들을 우선으로
reference.
반영했다는
And
거죠.
we
우리의 필요가
reflected
아니라.
the demand of North Korea.
그다음에 이제 섹터별로도 사실은
And by
과학 분야라든가
sector,
섹터별로도 할 수 있겠죠.
we can
여기
also
제시되어
promote
있는
cooperation.
이제 과학 분야
The example in the
R&D
slide
분야에서 협력
is the
방안인데요.
cooperation
그중에서
in
이제
science and research and
수질 문제
development.
파트입니다. 여러 가지 협력 방안들이 있는데
There are many
이런
ways
것들은
we can work
지금
together.
제가 몇 가지 뭐 섹터별로도 얘기를 했고
And
자치단체도 얘기를 했고
Until now, I mentioned the cooperation by sector, by regional level, and by national level, and
이렇게 얘기하고
short-term
있는
level.
거는 사실은 앞으로 협력 방안을 논의를 할
In the
때
future, when we discuss about cooperation,
상당히 그 부문별 또 국가 자치단체 경쟁적으로 이렇게
there
진행을
have been
하는
many
그런 경우가
competition of the
있었습니다. 잘
cooperation,
분위기가
sectoral competition and regional competition, but this is not the right approach. That's why I'm mentioning all of this.
이런 중앙부처가 해야
I
될 일,
believe we need
자치단체가
to
해야 될 일, 그리고
separate
각
the role of
지역에서 해야
the
될 일,
central government,
섹터별로
local
잘
government,
역할을
and scientific
분담해서
area.
조직적으로 효율적으로 추진을 해야 된다는 것이고요.
By doing so, we
문제를
can
보면
improve the
대동강
efficiency of the
문제에서
cooperation.
보시다시피
As
이런
we
물
can
문제가
see in the Taedong River,
물의 부족 문제도 있을 거고, 물의 질
obviously
문제도 있을
there
거고,
will be a
공급 문제도
problem
있을
of
거고,
the
공공
water
지역의
supply,
오염 문제도
water
있고, 이런
volume,
것들이
water
섞여 있습니다.
quality. These are all
그래서 결국 우리가 협력을
combined
한다 그러면
issue.
이런 걸 각계격파하는
So
것보다는
instead of
이것들을
addressing
통합적으로
issues one by
한꺼번에
one,
해결할 수 있는
a
그런
comprehensive
통합적
solution
사업이
and
추진돼야
comprehensive
된다는 게
projects
말씀을
would be
드리고자
required.
하는 내용입니다. 그래서 이런 내용들이 이제
And these
결론에서 정리가
are
된
the
거고요.
conclusions.
이제 전반적으로 보면 북한의 여러 시스템들을 볼 때
In North Korea, there are many systems,
이 정도 수준의
but the
수준
level of the
문제는
systems
그 정도
are still remained at the level we had in 1970s.
이제 한반도 물 정보 센터 같은 것들 빨리
And we
만들어서
need to
북한에
speed
대한
up
물
the
정보를
creation of the
저희들이 빨리
Korean
모아야
Peninsula Water Information Center
문제고,
in order to
이제
secure more
앞으로 이
information.
협력은 구조적인
And in the
문제들이 이제
future,
해결이 되기 전까지는
until
본격적으로
we
어렵기
address
때문에
the structural
그 전에
issues,
우리가
the actual
물
cooperation will
포럼이라든가
be
이런
difficult.
것들에서 좀 우리가 할수
So
있는 그리고
the first thing we
체계적으로
can
준비할 수
do
있는 것들을
is
좀
making a
준비를 하는 게
preparation
어떻겠냐
in
하는
our
것들이
side
필요합니다.
so that we can
특히 이제
promote
이
the systemic
과정에서
cooperation.
호칭을 둘게 과거에 우리가 했던 식으로
In the past,
물 수재해 물 이용
we divided the cooperation into many areas such as the water disaster, water management, and so on.
이런 것들을
However,
통합 사업을
instead of having different projects, we can have a comprehensive projects related to water. Thank you very much.
교수님 수고하셨습니다. 지금 마이크 되나요?
Is the microphone working?
네, 됐습니다.
Thank you.
자, 이창희 교수님 발표
Thank you,
잘
Professor Lee.
들었습니다.
That was a great
일반적으로
presentation.
재해,
Water disaster, water usage, water ecosystem, and that's the three areas that we needed to focus on and we needed to make an approach. And we talked about the water environment in North Korea, especially about the water quality and the water quality management in North Korea. Especially the water quality level is to the level of the late 1970s of South Korea. That is shocking.
자, 시간이 굉장히
And we are well overdue, actually. And because of the active and the detailed presentation of the three speakers, so we have only 15 minutes remaining, and we needed to close the session by 5. I want to ask the three panel members 4 minutes, 4 minutes each, sorry, 4 minutes each. And please be aware of the time. And please make your comment about the three presentations, especially focusing on the exchange in the water sector, and you can suggest your ideas on it. First, I would like to invite Secretary General Kim Tae-gyun from the KCRC. And it's time for your panel discussion, Mr. Kim.
셰퍼대사님 먼저 감사합니다.
Your Excellency, thank you.
북한에서 오랫동안
And you've been living in North Korea. You have first-hand experience. You are the professional diplomat. And every word you said was really helpful.
분단국가의 경험도 공유하고
And we share the same experience of the national division. And I believe you understand our situation very well.
이제 들어보니까
Listening to your presentation, you talk about the rise of the hardliners. According to what you say, the hardliners are getting dominant power. They want the withdrawal of the U.S. forces. They do not want to have the cooperation or openness, and they regard South Korea as a source of threat.
뭐 지금 그 인도적 지원도
Humanitarian aid is really necessary, but the humanitarian aid is not that transparent. And maybe we can be a little bit skeptical, so we need to be selective to target the medical area, water, and agriculture according to what you say. But now we have the COVID-19, but the
전면적이지 않으면 잘 안 되고
exchange with North Korea, if it is not comprehensive, it is not that accepted. And even the humanitarian aid is not accepted. But according to what you say, well, for South Koreans, we cannot do anything. And probably we need to wait for the mediocre guys or the not non-hardliners can take the power, or the moderate guys can take the power. We need to wait for the time, according to what you say. But I personally do not agree with you what you say. Even though the North Korea have hardliners, we need to manage it and we need to cooperate with them. So I'm wondering whether you made a conclusion about that or not, and what do you think about my proposal? And Mr. Kim, you talked about the Imjin River management. Well, it's related to the disaster. It is directly related to the environment and water quality. It is shared river. I don't think it is related to the sanction from the US. It is not relevant to the political tension between the two Koreas. And I believe this is the area that where the two Koreas should work together for the water management. I'm wondering what kind of discussion is being made with the K-Water, with the government, and you need to make this known to the citizens so that you can have a safer water management. And we need to have a cooperation momentum so that we can cooperate whatever the political situation may be. To Dr. Lee, Professor Lee, I fully agree with what you say about the tap water usage, especially from the 2017. 33% of the North Korean people can have access to the safe water according to their internal information, and their tap water is not that accessible and the water quality is not that good. So the tap water and the water supply issue is something that we need to fix together.
어떤 형태로 할 것인지
And we need to come up with a way how to help North Korea so that we can resolve this one.
통합적으로 할 수 있는 그런
And I sincerely hope that we can have the opportunity to help North Korea to resolve this issue along with the help from Dr. Lee.
이상 질문 마치겠습니다.
Thank you. That's it from me.
김태균 처장님 패널 토론 감사드립니다.
Professor Taekyun Kim, thank you very much for your comments. You made several comments and questions, and these questions will be answered after all the discussions. I will give an opportunity to the presenters after this discussion. We'll move on to Mr. Felix Lang.
한스자이델재단의 한국사무소 수석 연구원님 모시겠습니다.
Mr. Glenk, please.
Okay, so I think the microphone is working. I think we heard today 3 wonderful presentations, and I want to thank K-Water for making this possible, and also Tongilbu, the Ministry of Unification. Hans Seidel Foundation works with K-Water for several years, also in regards with North Korea. I won't address each presentation by itself, but rather try to do it in once because we just have 4 minutes left, and I try to be quick. I think we heard about the water situation in North Korea, and we clearly see this is a challenge for the Korean Peninsula, although it was about the water quality in North Korea. We also learned about the dams that are transboundary issues, bilateral problems, and I think this is really clearly an inner-Korean challenge that has to be addressed by bilateral cooperation. We heard also that bilateral cooperation is highly limited and restricted because it can be a threat or seen as a threat by hardliners in North Korea. So me as a foreigner, as a foreign institution in South Korea, we cannot engage in bilateral cooperation, but I think we can supplement it by international cooperation. So international cooperation could be a tool to bridge over some challenges. We heard that North Korea, they have some policies in the environmental issues. So I think a problem that we also saw is that North Korea, there is a lack of trust between South and North, but also lack of trust between North Korea and the international community. So it would be the questions, if we have the problem, how did the hardliners prevail? How can we engage the moderates, and how can we engage the moderates internationally? And I think that might be an opportunity for South Korea to engage globally. I mean, South Korea is a global player. If we basically use the global community with the support of South Korea to engage North Korea, then there are platforms for exchange between both countries. And we can also use the international community, for example, to engage moderates, to improve their status in North Korea. And also, for example, when we see we have a lack of information in North Korea. I mean, we have international organizations that work in North Korea. If these organizations gather information, these information are also available for South Korea. So I think bilateral cooperation is important. It's a very political issue. I think this is something that needs to be discussed continuously also between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un on a high political level. But I think at the same time, international cooperation can supplement inter-Korean relations, and therefore international cooperation can also benefit for inter-Korean cooperation. So this is as a thought of the Hans Seidel Foundation, because we work in that field. We try to offer, and will also in the future offer, South Korean institutions to create a platform, international platform for them to cooperate with North Korea and to have exchanges. So I would also love to hear your opinion on that. Maybe this as a supplement way, while inter-Korean exchanges are sometimes limited.
네.
Yes, Mr. Felix Klank, thank you very much for your comment. And I skipped the introduction. Actually, Mr. Felix Klank is in the Hans Seidel Foundation Korea, and he is the project manager of DPRK. So in Seoul, he is very active in the activities related to DPRK. And we'll move on to Professor Young-ho Kim from Seoul National University. He is in the construction division. And there is a Science Society, a Korean organization, and he is a chair, and he is also a vice chair of a academic society as well. Thank you very much for the introduction. In 4 minutes, I would like to finish my discussion, so I will speak in Korean. That was a joke. To light up the mood. First, let me express my appreciation for inviting me in this forum. I learned a lot about diplomacy, water volume and quality. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the discussion in DPRK, usually it is very abstract. However, today we can learn very practical lessons. And I learned a great deal. I am specialized in water resource, and as an academic person, I would like to express my own opinion. And since all the presentations were really excellent, I would like to skip questions. North Korean studies are very rare, and it is hard to find good studies. And I believe it is not about the level of interest. Rather, it is because of the lack of information and lack of data. If there are enough information and data, then all the engineers will study. My grandparents in father side and mother side, all they are from North Korea. So even after their passing, I wanted to study North Korea. So if there are enough information, I would like to study North Korea because it is neighboring our country. And I totally understand the challenges we have presented by Chang-hee Lee. And I also agree with information presented by other people. There are 3 issues. Now, sunshine policy is emphasized, and despite the political situation, what kind of things we can do, I thought about that. First, priority should be climate change. We have Mr. Glank from Hans Seidel Foundation Korea. As he mentioned, this is a global issue, and global cooperation is required. So between Korea, China, we are in the same climate umbrella. So these studies would be feasible, and many organizations, including Hans Seidel Foundation, can serve as a bridge. Korea already announced the 2050 carbon neutrality goal, so I believe it is most timely subject to study. And the second one is a drought issue, which was not mentioned here. Imjin River was emphasized today, and presenters mentioned the flood, but I want to emphasize drought because it is related not just to water volume, but also water quality. When we have a large volume of water, the concentration of the pollutants will decrease. However, when there is a drought, the water quality issue is even more severe. And when it comes to the drought, it is a constant and chronic issue compared to flood, which is a short-term issue. And I am also specialized in drought. In Seoul National University, the dean of the university was very interested in North Korean issue. So we had an internal issue. But I realized that there are not enough data. I expected that there are not enough data, but I really struggled to gather data. So I got the data from World Agricultural Organization, and there was data of the rainfall, and on average per year the rainfall was really fluctuating from 1,000 millimeters to several hundred millimeters. In North Korea, the rainfall dropped to even 700 millimeters. And North Korea is now experiencing agricultural difficulties as well. And due to the desertification in Mongolia, North Korea is also affected. But due to the Unification Water Forum, now we can access to more recent data. So I got the data in 2020, and now the waterfall is increasing. So I guess they are avoiding any droughts. But still, drought cannot be ignored in our study. And the third area is unmeasured area. After the Korean War, we lost a lot of data, and still it is very difficult to restore the data. However, in the recent decades, we accumulated lots of data. And despite the lack of the data, we need to have good prediction. So Korea has our own competitiveness in predicting. And this will be helpful for North Korea to measure things. So in the aspect of global cooperation and the academic aspect, I believe we can work together. Thank you very much, Professor Kim.
패널 토론과 발표제에 대한 그 질문이 있었습니다. 우선 그 관련된 질문에 대해서 발표자들의 답변을 듣는 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 지금 원래 5시까지인데 약간 시간이 좀 지체되고 있기 때문에 이 답변을 하실 때는 간략하게 이렇게 좀 정리해서 답변을 해주시길 바라겠습니다. 우선 토마스 셰퍼 대사님 부탁드릴까요?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will be brief. Perhaps I should clarify that I wanted to assess in my speech the opportunities that exist right now for cooperation between the two Koreas. That does not mean that my position would be to sit back and do nothing. But and on the contrary, I think I found it quite remarkable the planning that you have been doing concerning water cooperation in the field of water, and I would fully support it, of course. But I believe the chances to implement these plans in the near future are very slim. And until then, and I think as a first step, it would be advisable to try to to build cooperation and confidence with small projects, and therefore and build on those small projects then, and in the hope to realize the bigger projects later on. And for small projects, therefore, my very simple idea was, for example, that you might offer simple small projects of cooperation providing water in some villages as a first step, but by no means I would mean I wanted to say that you should not plan for the future and for bigger cooperation. Thank you.
혹시 다른 의원님들
And for the other presenters, and do you have any final comments? And if not, I would like to wrap this session up. If you do not have the burning question or the burning new ideas.
오늘 한국 수정
Thank you very much. This was organized by the K-Water. We thought about the Korean water-related disasters and the possible cooperation between the two Koreas and climate change.
세 분의 그 발표
Three presenters passionately made their presentation. That was really wonderful, and there were in-depth discussion followed. I sincerely hope that this conference can contribute to the future development so that the two Koreas can have a better cooperation in the water management and in water project for the future.
이 활용이 됐으면 하는 바람입니다. 오늘 이 행사를 추진해 주신
And once again, thank you very much for the K-Water and the STEM members of the K-Water. Thank you. I also want to thank you, those who are gathered here today and those who are watching us. And I would like to officially conclude this session. Thank you.